Hey everybody, welcome back. Um, so in our first video, we talked about a couple things. We talked about what this channel was about. We talked about gain structure, what that does for your audio system, and how to properly set it and check your metering to make sure you're in good shape. Today, we're going to be talking about EQ. We'll be talking about a few things with EQ. We're going to give you some practical examples of what EQ sounds like in certain situations. We're going to talk about what each knob on any type of EQ section does, what its purpose is, how that affects the sound, and we'll also talk about different kinds of EQ, parametric, shelving, notch, etc. So let's just jump right into it. I've got pulled up in Pro Tools a song that's got a lot of tracks. We're not going to worry about most of these. We're just going to focus on this one channel here. What I've done is I've taken every element of the drum kit that's recorded on this track, and I've grouped that and have it coming out of a single channel, which I have labeled as drum bus here. So this is where we're going to cover everything. So let's go ahead and talk about it. If you're in a live audio situation, you're only going to have one EQ to choose from, and it's probably going to look something like this. This has obviously more than EQ. This has gates, compressors, all kinds of stuff. It does have metering, like what we talked about in the last video. But what we're really going to be focusing on is this over here. And if you're in a recorded audio situation like this, this will give you a starting point. We'll go through a couple other types of EQs to talk about exactly what it does. So we're just going to start from, actually, you know what? We're not going to start from there. So what does an EQ do? An EQ affects the way something sounds by adjusting certain parts of the frequencies that are being sent out of the speakers. If you think about how humans process sound, everything we hear is a result of a vibration, a sound wave. And depending on how quickly those vibrations reach our eardrums and rattle the tympanic membrane back and forth, that determines what the pitch is that we hear, how tall or how big or small those sound waves are is the amplitude, that's volume. We'll get into more advanced concepts on a future video. But for right now, the important thing to realize is that we hear from about 20 hertz, which you can see on the screen here. When I move the mouse left and right, you'll see hertz up here. So we hear from about 20 hertz to about 20,000 hertz is a good estimate. And depending on what part of those vibrations we boost or cut, that will change the perceived sound. We use EQ for a number of reasons. We can use it in more of a preventative way to occasionally help with feedback. We can use it in a way to flavor the sound, to make something that sounds kind of dull sound better. If you have a vocalist like myself with a really kind of muddy sounding voice, EQ will help that. So a lot of benefits and a lot of reasons to know exactly what it is we're doing. So I'm going to switch back to the channel view here. We'll get back to that other view in a moment. But let's talk about the first type of equalizers, and that is filters. Filter is exactly what it sounds like. It is a device in an audio system that filters or removes part of the sound. And the way we will typically see filters is with high pass and low pass filters. High pass, meaning that we're letting any of the high sounds pass through and actually reach the listener. And then low pass is the opposite, letting just the lower sounds pass through. So let's just see what this looks like. Right now, we will start with the high pass filter, which is, you can see it starts low, goes up, and then evens out. That's how you know it's high pass. Right now it's out. As I adjust this knob, you go through different frequencies, 20, 240 all the way up to this specific filter goes up to 350. Some filters you can go all the way up to 20,000. Not 100% sure why you'd want to do that, but the option's there. So let's see what this sounds like. I'm slowly gonna move the filter up. And back down. So you can see as I move that up, the very, very low frequencies got removed until only the high ones remained at or above 350 hertz, which if we think about what 350 hertz sounds like, that's kind of like a low mid area. A lot of unpleasant sounding frequencies live around 350, so I can understand why they would put that there. Anywho, that's high pass filter. Let's do the same thing for low pass filter. I'll start the song and then turn the low pass filter down, and you'll hear how those extreme high end frequencies get filtered out. Let's listen. So that's down to 3 kilohertz right now, or 3,000 hertz. We'll put it back in. So that's what filters do. They're pretty straightforward. They're pretty safe since you're not boosting frequencies. You're not really, or you shouldn't really, as long as your gain structure is set up properly, encounter any issues with feedback or anything sounding super nasty. So why would we want to use filters? There's a number of reasons. Most frequently, filters are used to remove sounds that can cause issues either directly within that instrument or larger issues in the mix. So what you'll see in a lot of digital mixers and analog mixers for that matter is a low pass filter on every channel that's available to either engage or disengage. While the human voice, as we record it, or in this case a drum kit, might not have, like any one microphone, might not have a whole lot of 100 hertz and below. By the time you add in everything, all of those super low frequencies can stack together and make things kind of muddy. So what I'll typically do is I'll do a little bit of a filter on every channel, and how aggressive I am with that filter depends on what exactly it is I'm doing with it in that situation. So case in point, if I was going to, where's a good example? So let's think of the snare drum here. Right now, my filters here, I've got this set to 107 hertz, which is low, but not super low. There's not going to be a whole lot of situations in which, like a snare drum, for example, is going to need to be audible below 100 hertz. That's just frequencies that can muddy everything else up if you aren't removing those. And it's the same thing, I'd say, to an even larger degree with cymbals. If I look at the filter here, yeah, so for this overhead, and granted this is recorded audio, I probably wouldn't be quite this aggressive in a live audio situation. I've got this filter all the way up to 1,300 hertz, 1.3K. And if we listen to just that, you'd hear that all of those low frequencies, the drums, anything that aren't the cymbals, I'm filtering out just to help clean up the mix a little bit. And you can do the same thing with the high or the low pass filter rather, which takes out some of the high sounds. If you have a guitar, a lot of times this distorted guitar especially can sound a little scratchy in the high end. Adding a low pass filter will help mitigate some of that. If you have cymbals that are really, really bright sounding and kind of shimmery, sometimes a splash of low pass filter can really help with it. So if I was going to take this and based on what we're hearing adjust it, here's probably what I would do. Everything sounds good, but I might add in a high pass filter up to like 30. And that really isn't even making a huge difference, but just to filter out some of that rumble that I might not be able to hear on these speakers. And if I absolutely had to add in a low pass filter, I might just take out some of that extreme high end. So that's with it on. On. Off. So not a huge difference. It really just kind of cleans everything up. I'm going to set this back because I actually enjoyed the way it was before, so I'm not going to worry about that. So anyways, that is filters. Let's talk about the next type of EQ. That is shelving EQ. In this specific mixer, our high frequency HF and our low frequency LF bands are shelving. What does that mean? Let's go to the other EQ here and find out. So I'm going to switch this from high pass to low shelf. What shelving does is it takes anything above a point, if it's a high shelf, or below a point, and boosts it based on a value, or pardon me, not a value, but a preset curve. So this is set to 60 hertz. I'm going to try to make it noticeable, so I'm going to move it up to about 100 hertz here. Get out of the way, number 2. And kind of show you what it looks like. So let me engage this. I'm going to turn the gain up. So in general, that's what it looks like. You can see anything at this point, and a little bit above for that matter, but definitely everything below is getting raised or lowered. Very powerful. And then shelving on the high end, this is already set here, is the exact same way. It takes anything at or above a frequency, and a little bit below for that matter, and then we'll raise it or lower it, depending on whatever your command is. Let's go back to the other EQ. So this has 2 knobs. One is marked dB. If you'll remember back to our last video, decibel is the unit of measurement that we have for pretty much all things audio. So it starts at 0. That means it's neither cutting nor adding amplitude to that specific setting. It's not doing anything. This other knob here is kilohertz. Right now it's set to 8. A lot of mixers, the high frequency is set to 8 by default. And then if we move up here, it's not changing how much we're boosting or cutting. It's changing what frequency we're boosting or cutting. So let me bypass this and let's listen to this high shelf EQ in action. Back at its starting point here. Oop. Now I'm going to turn it down to negative 15. It was at positive 15 earlier. So in that instance, you can hear it's pretty similar to a filter. Not quite, doesn't get all the frequencies out, but it cuts it a pretty dramatic amount. So if I do that same thing, but I leave this knob at 0, neither boosting or cutting, this knob is essentially rendered useless. It's not doing anything because you're changing frequencies without actually making a change to that frequency. So I'm going to boost this a little bit and then sweep through these frequencies so you can see what that sounds like. So pretty powerful tool, shelving EQ is. We won't talk about Q on that. So the two really important parts of shelving EQ are the frequency that you're setting that shelf to affect, and then dB, how much you're boosting it or cutting it. Let's just jump right to low shelving. Exact same functions. dB, adding or cutting that frequency. The hertz marker here, since we're not in thousands of hertz, we're measuring in individual hertz, is what is being affected. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to set it to about 200 turn it up, turn it down, sweep through the frequencies, let you see, or hear rather, what's being done. So there you have it. That's what shelving EQ does. It raises or it boosts or cuts at or above in the case of a high shelf, or below in the case of a low shelf, any given frequency. Let's talk about the third type of EQ here, and that is parametric EQ. What parametric EQ does is it gives you a frequency to boost or cut. It gives you amplitude in terms of how much you boost or cut. And this also gives you Q, the letter Q, or bandwidth. So that's going to be how tight of a space or wide of a space you're boosting or cutting here. Let's jump right in here to HMF, high mid frequency. So these two serve the exact same purpose. dB to boost or cut, kilohertz to choose the frequency. The Q here, if we have it set all the way to the left here, you can see that little notch there is really small. So it's going to be a very narrow Q, and over here is wide. So that's going to be a very wide Q. Typically, the higher the number when it comes to Q, the tighter the notch, and the smaller number, the wider the notch. So let's jump into it, and I'll let you just listen to it. So we'll start with a narrow Q. I'm going to boost it, sweep through the frequencies a little bit, and then mess with the Q so you can hear what that sounds like. So there you have it. Again, a very, very powerful tool at your disposal. This LMF, low mid frequency, everything is the exact same. The Q, booster cuts, and a frequency knob. The only difference is this goes down to a little bit lower frequency and ends at a lower frequency than the high mid. So we'll do the same thing just really quickly there. I said that 350 typically sounds nasty. Let's boost that a little bit and see why. So that's what that sounds like. And that's really all of the important settings that I want to go through here. These are going to be more or less universal. If you go sit down at any random mixing desk, you should be able to take what we've just covered here and have an idea of what each thing does. I do want to do one more thing with this before we cover the next point, and that is to do the same thing, but just have it visualized here. I'm going to visualize it just for edification, but use your ears. Don't look at something and have that be, the deciding factor in whether or not it sounds good. Use your ears first, and then if you need to validate or check something, then, look at a spectrometer or a meter or something like that, but your ears are always going to be the source of truth. So let's just look at this and see what it does. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to change one to a filter so we can see that in action. There we go. And you can see the frequency here, about 1,000. We're going to bring that down, and we'll see those low frequencies come back in. Let's leave that about 40 for now. Let's jump to the high shelf. I'm going to adjust the gain up. Okay. And then these little bells here, that's for parametric. So let's go to that 350 area. I'll cut a little bit of that. see, the lower the number, the wider the curve. Higher the number, the tighter. We'll boost a little bit here. Not that we need to, but for the sake of illustration. Here it is with it on. So it can make quite a difference to a mix. EQ is going to be, I think, you can think of that as your primary color palette when you are mixing either in live sound or in recorded sound. You can have a lot of bang for your buck in terms of making it sound the way you want to. So definitely important to master that. If you're in a live audio situation, a couple things to watch out for. Boosting, especially if you have a lot of vocal mics, lapel mics, countryman microphones on stage, boosting high frequencies a lot can start to get you into trouble with feedback, specifically like 4K and up is what I found, although it's going to be dependent on your room and your situation. Gain structure will help with that, but still, if you boost something 20 dB at 4K, you're probably not going to have a good time. A lot of people say cut first and then boost to try to EQ something the way you want it to sound. I think for live sound, that's an okay way to think about it, but I would offer this. Almost always what I and other people hear isn't so much that a voice is not bright enough, rather that it's too muddy. So I would say if you have to cut in that low mid area, just as a general rule first, and see if that makes it sound better. If it does, and you've cut and it sounds less muddy but still not as brilliant, then you can turn up the high end a little bit. I mean, really, EQ is such a subjective thing, and it takes years and years to practice and get to the right spot. But I think knowing that or using that methodology works. If you're in a studio setup and you are trying to get something to sound like an album, you can afford to be much, much more aggressive with your EQ to the point where, again, if you're trusting your eyes, it might seem like you're doing it wrong, but I assure you, your ears are going to tell you whether or not you're doing it correctly or incorrectly. It is not uncommon if I'm on a kick drum or a snare drum, for instance, and I want that really clicky attack if I'm producing a heavy metal song, I might boost 8K by 15 dB and then put on another EQ and boost it again after that. It really just depends on the situation. But those are all the key areas of what an EQ does. Those are the definitions. If you're not sure, start off with small boosts and cuts and get a little bit more gradual from there. I mean, actually, let me check one more thing. Okay, yeah, we'll cover this in a different video. We'll talk about EQing a room and what that can do. So, yeah, we'll go ahead and end the video here. I know this has already been going on for quite a bit. Thanks again for checking it out. Our next video will be on compressors and limiters. Until then, take care. We'll see you soon.